I promised we'd look at a little bit more of my woodworking here on this channel. I'm working on a set of kitchen cabinets, or I should say kitchen shelves, because they probably won't have doors on them. And these are being made out of Douglas fir. So I thought I would just talk about this a little bit and bring you along on the process. I've already completed one of these sets of shelves, and I thought I would go ahead and get started on the second one today, and then we would explain what I'm doing and kind of why. It's not really going to be a how-to video though, because as a woodworker, I'm quite the amateur and perhaps not the best person to learn from, but if you're interested in what I'm up to, you'll get to see that. And this is just a real simple set of shelves. It's laying on its side right now. It will actually hang on the wall, it'll stand up the other way, and it's got two adjustable shelves in it that we'll be able to use for various things. And this will just be the same as any other set of kitchen shelves. You'll just put whatever you need, whether it's dishes or dry goods or canned goods or whatever in there. And as I say, I'm using Douglas fir, and I have found that the Douglas fir is pretty hard wood to work. I thought it wouldn't be so bad, but it's got real odd grain and it has hard and soft rings. Makes it really hard to work with hand tools. Edge planing, like I was doing over there, isn't so bad, but trying to surface plane this wood was an awful experience. Luckily, I had access to a power surface planer for a couple of days, and I was able to run all this through there, get it all down to a consistent thickness. But I will do some with hand tools. I don't own a table saw anymore. I got rid of that, and maybe we'll talk about that in another video. But for now, just working on the cabinet, and this is pretty much what it looks like. You can see it's got a bottom cleat here, and that'll screw to the wall, and it's got a top cleat, but there will be no back on the cabinet. The walls in our kitchen are wood, so you'll be able to see the wooden wall of the kitchen through the back of the shelf, if there's room to see anything through the back of the shelf. I am edge planing one of the sides, and I start off with just a number 5 plane to get the rough sawn edges off. Then I'm going to go to number 8 until I get a nice clean shaving, and then I'll know that that's a nice smooth edge. And I'm going to do that to each side, and then we'll cut these to length and do anything else that needs to be done with them. But the first step, I just want to get it good and smooth, and the 2 faces are already done because I used that power planer. Okay. So with the edges cleaned up, the next thing I want to do is I want to cut one good square end, make sure the board is as neat and clean on the end as possible. Trying to do this with a handsaw has been really splintery. It can be done. You got to put a nice deep knife line in there and cut right to the knife line. And then you may need to shoot the ends, which is running a plane across the ends. And I got a special shooting board for that makes things really nice and smooth and square. But it still chips the wood a little bit. And to avoid that, I'm using a Festool track saw. This is one of the things that prompted me to get rid of my table saw, because the track saw is portable. It can go more places than a table saw. And for cutting plywood and sheet goods, it's a wonderful tool. And it does a pretty good job for cross-cutting boards like this. And the way this saw works is it slides on this track, and wherever the track is where the saw will cut. It's got a little sacrificial plastic strip along the edge that is exactly on the inside of the saw blade, and it just makes a wonderful cut. And the fence is nice and square. And in an ideal world, you hook it up to dust collection so that it doesn't spew sawdust, but I don't have that set up. That gives me a nice clean edge there. I'm going to go ahead and take both boards to that same stage, get the edges cleaned up, get one edge cut square, and then I'll look at the next step of the process, which will be cutting a curved profile on the bottom of the board. They aren't cut square across the bottom. Now, I'm going to spread this video out over several days. I'm not going to try and do this entire shelf in one video. So you'll likely see a wardrobe change between now and the next step. So my next step is to cut the curve on the bottom of the shelf. And I'm not going to cut it exactly to size right now. I'm going to lay it out and cut close to the line, but not right on it, because this stuff does chip. And even with a good fresh blade in the bandsaw, there's still just enough chip out that I'm going to worry about it. So I'm going to sand it to the final profile. And I'm just using my first cabinet as a template. I'm going to clamp it on there so it doesn't move. That should hold that just fine. And then I'm just going to trace this. And that gives me my line to cut to. Time for a little quality control expert here. Time for Smitty the shop cat to inspect the work. And I have a nice sharp blade in the bandsaw and a relatively new low clearance insert in there that helps reduce the chipping considerably. So that gives me two panels that are very close to being the same profile, but not close enough. You can tell that it's not a very smooth cut. You can see there's maybe a 1/16 of an inch of chip out along here, which is why I didn't cut right to the line. And I'm going to sand down to the line now. And I'm just using a handheld belt sander. I thought about taking these up to the blacksmith shop and using the big belt grinder, but they're probably a little too aggressive. Okay, so it looks like I've managed to crack one of these, and I think I did that when I set the holdfast to transfer my pattern from the other shelf. And it's not bad. You can't actually see it when you're just looking at it, but you can kind of see. Now I'm having trouble finding it. But if I push on it, I can get it to separate a little bit. It looks like it's only cracked up to here. It's not big enough that I can easily get some glue in there, also, although maybe some fine CA glue might soak down in there. And my shelf eventually will come across this area, and that's going to help reinforce it. But I would like to do something with this. This side is the outside that'll show in the room, but I think if I go to the inside, I can put a little butterfly patch kind of right in here. I don't know if you can see my pencil mark. I'm going to have to erase that when I do the actual patch because I might get confused which mark is which. But I think if I do that, that'll hold that, and then I can sneak a little bit of CA glue in there, the real fine watery stuff, and probably that's going to hold real well. If I had to, I could probably cut a little slot or even just drill a hole right here and put something in there that helps reinforce that. And I think we're going to try this first, and then when we cut the shelf in, like I say, it's going to go right across there. I think that's going to help quite a bit. Again, this may not be the best way to go. This is just the way I chose to go with this. Like I say, as a woodworker, I'm pretty much an amateur, so I'm just showing you my thought process at the moment. I got a piece of paper folded in quarters here. And I think I want my Little butterfly patch to be about that long. And about that wide at the widest point. No. Because it's folded, I just want to cut this at half of my width here. So that's about there. And then I just want to cut a nice little hourglass or butterfly shape. I don't think it needs to be super dramatic, but it needs to be enough to hold it. I think that might be a little bit big. Let's trim that down a little bit. It's pretty good, I think. So I need to cut that out of something, and I'm going to use this piece of material here, but it's a little bit too thick, so I'm going to cut a piece out that's big enough to do this, plane it down so it's thinner, and then I'll cut this to shape. And I think if we just leave ourselves something about like that, we'll have plenty to work with and still be able to plane it. So I'm going to thin this down to about 1/4 of an inch. Probably got enough material here that I could cut a couple of these if I mess one up. Yeah, the bandsaw's a bit of a cheat, but it'll go real quick. To clean up the irregularities, I'm just going to use a chisel and support it in a bench hook here. That way my fingers can be behind the chisel. Now because this is an irregular piece, I want to make sure that I put what's going to be the bottom down against here. I want to put a mark that tells me what the orientation is, because if I get it turned around or upside down, it is not going to fit the same. My pencil line's on the outside of the piece, so I need to cut to the inside when I do this. It's a great place to trace with a knife, but it's real easy to pull this out of the way. So I'm going to try and do that very carefully. I'm going to probably work around in circles here because I want the straight side of the knife to the outside of this. It's one advantage of having a workbench, you can walk around. Trying to stay inside my pencil line here. I'm not going to try and cut too deep because it's, like I say, it would be really easy to slice off in some odd direction. Real gently strike straight down with a chisel. Realize I'm starting to make this sound more instructional. I really don't mean to. I've been making some pretty good progress with this, not going too badly. These little skew chisels are really pretty handy for this. Not the highest quality tools. I don't know how long I've had them. It says they came from Woodcraft. Probably had them for 15, 20 years. But they do get into these pointy corners. And luckily they come in a set of lefts and rights. Now to really clean that up, I think I'm going to go to a little router plane here. I'm going to set that just shy of the depth of the little butterfly patch there. And this would be much easier if I had a pointed blade in this. I do not have a pointed blade for this. They make them. I'm going to need to get one sometime, but this will still clean this up pretty good. And when that doesn't cut anymore, it's an even smooth depth, or as smooth a depth as I can make it. And we see if this fits. It's a pretty good fit. It's a little gappy around the edges. I might have to tuck a little sliver of material in there to fill it in. Fits better than some of the ones I've done though. I'm getting better at this all the time, but still not perfect. So now I can glue that in. Probably more glue than I need there. Let's see if I can get a little glue down in the crack itself right through there. Not as important once this in. This is really going to hold it together quite well. At least that's my hope. I'm going to clamp that down. And I also want to put a clamp across here to make sure that that gap hasn't opened up any in that direction in the process. And let it dry. I'm just going to use a nice sharp block plane to take that down to level. This Douglas fir does not plane very well, so once I get to that point I may finish it just by sanding. The patch is done. This feels pretty darn solid now. I don't see any wiggle in that joint. And by the time the shelf goes in, it's going to reinforce it more. So I think I'm pretty darn happy with it. So the next thing to do is to lay out and cut our dados for the shelves. Or dado on one side and a rabbet on the other. So here again, I'm going to use my original cabinet. And I'm going to use it to lay out this other board. It's a little offset here just so I can get in there and make my mark, lining it up at the top. And I just want to mark where my shelf needs to go here. I'm going to make sure my marks here are really right where I want them. I'd hate to make the slot too big. I'd rather make it a hair small and have to enlarge it. It looks pretty good. Now when I did that first cabinet, I cut the dado for the bottom shelf and there's a rabbet for the top shelf. I did all that with hand tools. I laid it out with a striking knife and made a nice deep knife cut, struck in with a chisel, took out a little chip, redid the knife cut until I had a nice deep starting place for a back saw. Then I very carefully sawed that with a back saw. But unfortunately, because this Douglas fir still wants to chip, even with the knife line, the pressure of the back saw up against the edge of the board broke out a few chips, and then things still didn't go quite as smoothly as I would like. So I'm going to take a little bit different approach this time. And I'm going to go ahead and cut these with that Festool track saw. It will make a nice, crisp, clean cut. Because of the pressure of the track and that sacrificial plastic strip down on the board, it doesn't chip as badly. It may still chip a little, but it shouldn't be as bad as with the hand saw. While I really want to embrace hand tool woodworking, this wood has proven to not be very hand tool friendly. So I think when I get back to using hand tools for my projects, I'm going to find some different material. Now this saw has an adjustable depth stop here, so I can set it for what I believe is half the thickness of my board. Then I'm just going to use a scrap piece to test that. I think I can go just a hair deeper. That looks better. And because this saw cuts exactly on the edge of this fence and is quite precise, I can just use a lineup block there. And then I just have to remove that. I think I'm going to go ahead and take another pass just to make that easier. Just bump that in just a little bit. So here I want to make sure that I'm either splitting that line in half or leaving the entire line, which means I can always make it a little bit bigger later. It says sticky rubber on the bottom, so you got to lift it up to be able to slide the board in most cases. Certainly not something a professional cabinet maker would do, but I don't plan to be a professional cabinet maker. Take a pass down the middle just to make it easier. Now here I can't put the line the same place I did on the other side because it cuts on this side of the line, so I got to leave space for my saw blade, so I'm going to sneak up on it a little bit. Secure that to the bench. I'm just going to start by taking out most of this. Yeah, it's going to go a lot easier than the last time. Yeah, I'm going to have to take just another quarter of a saw blade width maybe out of that. Now on the edges, I want to make sure I don't push out here because that will chip that. So I'm going to come in and do this side, then I'll do that side. I'll clean this bottom up with a little router plane when I'm all done. So I'll see you when I get to that point. This is a good way to guarantee everything's at the exact right depth and all cleaned out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to both dados and both rabbets, and I'm going to go ahead and cut my shelves to length, and then we'll see what the next step is. Well, progress is still being made. We're several days into this now. Lots of other projects I'm working on at the same time. But the shelves now fit, so these are going to be just fine. And these are the fixed shelves. There'll be some movable shelves, and that's the next step I need to do. And that would be drilling the holes for those shelves. And to do that, I've got this thing I bought from Rockler Woodworking years and years ago. It's called a Jigget template system. This has evenly spaced holes, so I get the holes in the same place on both sides of the shelf, both front and back. So there's 4 sets of holes I have to drill here. So let's go to the drill press and drill some holes. So after drilling that first hole, I can put a pin in here to hold that in place so it doesn't slip one way or the other. And I'm just using a 1/4 inch drill bit because it's the same size as my pins will be. And then I'm going to drill every other hole because I just don't need that many adjustments. Oh, by the way, this is a special drill bit that will indexes right to the jig and will only drill so deep, so I don't have to worry about drilling through. It's spring loaded. And now we have some nice evenly spaced holes to put the shelves in. This will need a little bit of sanding, but I'll do that after it's all assembled, because I'm sure I'll need to sand more right before we varnish it. And that, of course, means the next thing to do is assemble it. I will initially assemble it just with glue, although I don't think glue is enough to hold this together, especially the top shelf, because it's going to have to hang from that top shelf. There'll be a cleat that this hangs on, but that's supported by the top shelf. So there'll be some other fasteners used, but I want to get it glued together, held where I want it, then I'll worry about those other fasteners. Most of my clamps are just a little bit too short, so I'm going to end up resorting to some fairly long clamps here. But that's okay. It's always exciting to get to the glue up stage, but it's also one of the more scrambly and fiddly parts, trying to hold all the boards and the clamps all at the same time. Luckily I can put that top shelf in from the top. It doesn't have to go in right now. Pick the prettier one for the bottom. So now I'm going to go around and chase some glue dribbles if there are any. Not very many. Then I'll pick this back up again after the glue dries, but that'll be just a few seconds video time, and we'll do those last few little fasteners, and pretty much this will be done for now. Now on the very top of the shelf, because it's not contained on both sides, I went ahead and put screws in. I would prefer not to have screws in this project, but there are a few places that I'm going to use them in these next few steps, just because I think it's going to be the strongest and the safest for a cabinet hanging on the wall. But down here on this shelf, I'm toenailing some cut nails in, and that will lock into the top here so these sides can't spread apart. And the only way to get that joint apart would be to pull the nails out. If you put nails in through this way, they would be able to just pull apart. If the glue failed, you'd just pull the sides of the shelf off. But these little toenails are really quite strong. You just have to be careful and make sure you don't have a nail that's long enough to come all the way through. Just enough pilot hole to help guarantee that I don't split the wood. So that's the basic construction of these shelves. You can see what they're going to look like. My final step at this stage of the game is going to be to put some cleats in the back, right up under the top shelf and right up under the bottom shelf. And these will be what the shelf actually attaches to the wall with. So these will get some holes and some screws to go into the wooden walls upstairs. And this will also help reinforce the sides. So once I get these boards planed down, cut to length, I'll put some pocket screw holes in here, and we'll screw these to the side walls. Again, I'd rather not use screws, but I think it's the strongest, safest, most secure way to do this. So let's do that, and then we'll be done for a while. I'm going to round one edge up just a little bit, because that's the part that'll be inside the cabinet. Make sure the ends cut square. Then I'll mark my length on the cabinet here. Now to do these pocket holes and pocket screws, I use a Kreg jig, and it's got a guide that sets a perfect angle and a step drill that drills a flat bottom hole so the screw has something to bear on, and a pilot hole for the screw to go through. And it's just a matter of clamping everything up in the jig where you want it and drilling the hole. And I do that two places on this top rail because it's the one that needs the most strength. And the bottom rail is skinnier because I don't have room under the cabinet. There's a plug that sits right here, so I have to have a skinnier rail. I'm going to put just a little bit of glue on this just to help secure it to the top shelf. And I'll clamp that flush with the back. My shelf hangs over a little bit because my boards weren't all the same width, but I'm going to plane that down flush with this rail when we're all done here. Then I can go ahead and screw that in. This will make for a good solid hanging rail. And of course I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom. After that, it's just a matter of making sure everything's flush. It'll get a final sanding and it'll get varnished. But we're not going to varnish it probably for another month because we'll do that out on the porch where it's better ventilated, and it's just not warm enough to do that right now because the varnish takes 24 hours or more to dry and I don't want it to be below freezing. So it's going to be a little while before we get to that point, and I may sand it then. So I think this is where I'm going to call it good for this video. I think you get the idea. Like I say, as a woodworker, I'm really an amateur and I'm still figuring some of this stuff out. So as we do more woodworking projects, hopefully I'll get a little bit better, and hopefully I'll have wood that isn't quite as cranky to work with as this Douglas fir. I really like the way the Douglas fir looks, but it's really hard to work with, and given my preference, this will be the last project I do out of Douglas fir. I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button down there. Feel free to stick around, watch a few of the other videos. We're going to be doing lots of different things here on this channel, from woodworking projects to banjo playing to flying drones, who knows what else. So stick around and you can see what I'm up to in the weeks and the months to come. In the meantime, I hope you and your family are staying safe and healthy. I hope you're finding something to work on, some sort of project to keep you occupied right now. But one way or the other, we'll see you for the next one.